Hi, everyone. Welcome to the governance update for the 11th of June, 2021. This is the one with Steve Cooper. Oh, hang on. They're all with Steve Cooper. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Chris. Thanks for that welcome.
How are you?
Look, I'm well. In fact, for some news that hit the streets this week. So for anyone that wants to be in the room where it happened.
You realise this is the governance update. It's not the showbiz report, don't you?
This is a story of governance writ large for any students of governance. So get along to Hamilton when it gets to Melbourne, I would suggest.
I feel like we need to explain the visuals, because we've got a growing number of people who prefer the podcast, Steve. I think they're making the choice to not look at us, but perhaps listen to us in the off chance that we might say something of value.
Actually, and you're right. So, one of our regular critics is a definite podcaster. So I should explain to her that I just popped up the Hamilton logo on my background. So thanks for that reminder, Chris.
And that regular listener, if it's the one, I think was particularly pleased with last week's governance update and our top 10. We've had some good reaction to that. I want to come back to that at the end when we do our mailbag. But
I think that'd be a nice.
Did you get much response to it? Indeed. Did you hear much?
I got some positive commentary, Chris, which was surprisingly uncritical. So we might have to do something like that again.
Excellent. There you go. For those who missed it, we did the top 10 factors for success when you have a new CEO. And we have more CEO news, Steve. In fact, we've got really big news to talk about. So people may be aware that the CEO at Warrnambool City Council, Peter Schneider, last year was dismissed by the council, and he then lodged a Supreme Court case. The decision has come down today, in fact, as we record this, in his favour, and the judge has ordered his reinstatement and the awarding of costs against the council. And this is pretty huge on a number of levels when you think about the implications of this, Steve. I know it's just hot off the press. What's your early take on this?
And look, Chris, our usual disclaimer, we're not lawyers, but for anyone that's interested, the decision is actually available on the Supreme Court of Victoria website. I want to talk about that website in a minute. And I've had a quick look. A couple of bits of news. One is to say that Tony Rownich, managing partner of Hunt & Hunt, is expected to appear on the newsroom next week. And I know Hunt & Hunt are planning on putting out an advisory on this. So always a good idea to wait and see what the lawyers say. But my quick take would be there's a couple of really key things. One relates to the fact that what's in the contract around termination appears to also require that there will be some natural justice and procedural fairness in the way that the contract is exercised. And probably a bigger question or issue on that topic, Chris, is that councils, like any statutory body when exercising powers, it's not unlimited. Just because the Act says that you can, your ability to act might be fettered in some way, and being cautious is not a bad thing.
So for those who didn't understand a word of what Steve just said, there's a clause in most, if not all, CEO contracts in Victoria, at least, that gives the council the option of dismissing a CEO without giving a reason, effectively. Mr. Schneider challenged that on the basis of natural justice, that he'd not had the opportunity to hear what their concerns were and respond to those concerns. So what exercises my mind, Steve, is the implications for all of those contracts that have that clause in it that are in existence now for council CEOs in Victoria.
I'll be interested in what Tony's comments are, Chris. I would have thought not much, that the contract itself is sound, but it goes to how the council, typically through its CEO Employment Matters Committee, ensures that those provisions of natural justice and procedural fairness apply, which is really no great difference to how a council enforces or acts in regard to various sections of legislation for which a council is responsible.
Oh, you're a voice of reason. That's good.
And good sense, Chris, I hope.
As you said, Tony Rownich is putting his mind to this Supreme Court decision today, and we might have some more observations and implications to talk about with Catherine in the newsroom next week. But thanks for that scene setter, Steve. The upshot of all of that is my mail is that Mr. Schneider's returning to work the week after next at Warrnambool, and that's going to be interesting. Anyway, the Ombudsman's back in the news this week, Steve, with a new report into a procurement issue at the City of Melton. This is pretty serious. The Ombudsman has found that an officer has, I guess, taken advantage of what she calls lax oversight to attain $1.6 million in council work for a company that officer, in fact, ran, or it was his company. Have I got that right?
I think that's pretty right, Chris, and it's been well publicised. Might not have got to the end, so how about I talk about something related, and that is some reports in the media that Michael Gove, English or UK minister, might have been involved in the award of a contract to former colleagues. And the court in that matter in England found that that was absolutely inappropriate, that a contract would be awarded to former colleagues. We'll talk in a minute about conflict of interest and the niceties, and there's often an ethical dimension about conflict of interest, but I think the point out of the Gove matter, because I don't particularly want to talk about Melton, is that awarding of a contract that favours oneself or one's friend is just wrong. It's not an ethical dimension. It's just not the right thing to do. Yeah. And the Ombudsman's reported on that in a related way, according to Melton. Have I skirted around that?
Well, you have skirted around it.
Indeed. It's been topical, Chris, because IBAC ran a session during the week around conflicts of interest. Adam Fennessy, Kate Radigan from Education Department, Julie Reid, there'll be other speakers I've omitted, David Wolf chaired the matter, but talking around some of that nicety, particularly parts that I paid real attention to around that notion of a perception of conflict of interest, which seems to be a recurring theme for councillors and officers, Chris, and really deserves some attention.
I really wanted to attend that session. Unfortunately, I had a clash of commitments, so I'm not sure. I should check out whether there's a recording available. Do you know?
There wasn't when I looked on Thursday afternoon, Chris, but I noted that their previous session was up on the IBAC website. So I think a check in a week or two and you may well find it.
So Steve didn't want to say too much about the Ombudsman's report. It is public, of course. It's been released this week. I just want to touch on the recommendations. So the Ombudsman's recommended that the council refer the conduct of this person to Victoria Police and to ASIC. So she's suggesting it is of a certain threshold that it should be looked at seriously by those entities, and has made some recommendations about the risk, conflict of interest processes, transparency of labour hire arrangements back to the council. And it's worth noting that the council has accepted those recommendations.
Chris, a few things pop out of that in terms of councils as contract managers. And I think the Ombudsman's touched on it in her report that one real key risk is where the expertise lies with the contractor. And so the inability of the organisation to really effectively manage the contract because no one really is across the content. And I mean, that's not unreasonable and not a criticism of Melton, because at times you get contractors in because you don't have the expertise in-house. Yes. So that really needs to be paid attention to. I mean, and the other one is probably a recurring theme of mine around, it's one of the elements of outsourcing is that, you know, that contract management element really needs to be appropriately resourced as a general rule.
Okay, we might leave that one there. There's a lot of news around this week. I want to get on to virtual meetings because the sector's being asked for its view on if and how virtual meetings might remain a permanent part of the landscape going forward.
Yeah, there's a discussion paper that was released as part of a bulletin from Local Government Victoria, Chris. And as I recall, there are three options that councils are asked to respond to. Around attendance by councillors virtually at meetings. And I recall that option one was making it an as-of-right entitlement. Correct. Option two, making it an entitlement that meetings be attended virtually as long as that is consistent with the council's governance rules in regard to meetings. And option 3, no, you need to attend the meeting physically. So,
and they've rightly included some narrative around the gender equality piece and making and inclusiveness, I guess, and making it more accessible for people to participate in the process as councillors, regardless of their other responsibilities.
Yeah, a really good point, and an emerging theme on all of these, Chris. And I think the gender equality element also reminds us that those either inclusiveness or considering barriers to participation by a range of diverse groups is an element of our responses on all of these matters.
So we've touched on a bit of procurement stuff in relation to the Ombudsman's report today, and some transparency. You've picked up on a little story, Tweed Shire Council this week, Steve. A lot of councils deal with this issue of how far to go in weighting local suppliers and businesses, and then the next part of that is, well, how do we define local? Is it just our municipality? Is it within a certain distance over the border, et cetera, et cetera? What are they doing in Tweed about this issue?
Chris, the details are a bit patchy, but the Tweed Shire Council obviously has a priority for local procurement, if you like, and has resolved to do regular reporting of goods and services procured locally. This is an interesting issue for a range of reasons that councillors, I know in the rural areas often in procurement there is a waiting for local purchase, but there's a bit of uncertainty in terms of what does constitute local. So I'd be looking for a policy issue there. Probably a bigger question too, though, is where does that sit in relation to obligations, under national competition? And that was really brought to light for us. Catherine and I met this week with the Office of the Commissioner for Local Jobs First, which is a state government agency tasked with, particularly on projects of over $1 million in rural or over $3 million in the metro, ensuring that councils and public agencies actually have a plan that is auditable in regard to local product. And the thing that struck me about all of this, Chris, is that councils have got to do their procurement plans or procurement policy by year end. So it's a good time for the council to think about those issues that might not necessarily be front of mind, such as this.
Steve, I'm not sure if you've picked up, it came to my attention just very recently that a group of councils in the north of Melbourne, about 6 or 7 of them, have come together and developed a policy that is common to them all, with schedules to pick up for some local differences, etc. But I thought it was a really good collaborative effort, taking that local lens, I guess, a little bit broader.
I think so, Chris. I mean, one of the issues for councils in regard to economic development is that often supply chains, the end-to-end of supply chains, is often outside a particular municipality, but maybe particularly where there are supply chains within a region, that councils acting as a group can really tap into that and achieve an economic as well as a value for money end.
All right. Well, there's a topic I wasn't aware we were going to be getting into today. Here's another one. You've alerted me to the fact that VLGA is going to audit fraud control in relation to local government grants very shortly.
Yeah, I got to meet with a team from VLGA earlier in the week, Chris, and the issue that's exercising the mind of VLGA is that there are 2 elements to this. One is the element of government grants received by a council and acquitted. The other one being the role of the council in dispensing, for example, community grants to local agencies. Now, there is a bunch of work around on both in terms of what is good practice, but again, like some of the issues that we talked about before, sort of that distinction between good practice and value for money, and what is actually being done might come out during the audit. I had a sense that VLGA are particularly interested in the community grants element. And I know we had a piece of work on the VLGA website that goes back to 2002 as a good practice guide, it still stacks up pretty well. But the reality is we haven't seen a lot of thinking on that community grant space. And some of the issues, for example, with sports rorts at a federal level tell us that there are some really important transparency and value for money elements that fall out of this topic.
And I see that they're proposing a mix of metro and rural councils for that, which is pretty much the usual practice. So we'll wait to see what comes from it.
Yeah, so the councils that have been targeted for that particular audit know who they are.
All right, Steve, before we wrap up, a quick check of the mailbag. We do invite your comments and your feedback, and we were particularly looking for your thoughts on whether we missed anything in the top 10 of factors for success when you've got a new CEO.
I was surprised by that feedback, Chris. I was actually hoping for some kind of particular element that perhaps we've missed, but our commentator took a more global view, perhaps.
Yes, so if you check out the YouTube comments, we did have someone suggest that using a fanfare to introduce the topic was somehow putting public servants on a pedestal. That's his view. He's entitled to it. But you're right. I was looking for more about, well, you missed this or you didn't get that. But maybe we hit the mark.
Look, and it's an interesting one, Chris. I would just say I think that as a society, it's not a bad thing to be honouring the role of people who give service to the public, and that we should celebrate public service in that context. But people in the public service that I know, and probably that you know, also understand that there's more than a bit of humility that goes with that responsibility.
Very, very well said. All right, Steve, I think that's all the news for this week. And other than the fact that Hamilton's coming to Melbourne, we hope it's been very useful for you. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Chris. Have a great weekend.
When is it coming, Steve? How long have I got to prepare for this?
I think about a year, Chris. There's no great rush.
Okay.
You can watch the Disney version in the meantime.
I might save it and watch it just before, so it's fresh.
You do that.
Thanks, Steve. Steve Cooper is the Chief of Staff of the VLGA, with us for the governance update, as he is each and every week here on VLGA Connect. Do have a great long weekend, and we'll see you for more VLGA Connect very soon.